The year is 1718, monsoon season on the Konkan coast. A convoy of 3 British East India Company merchantmen is rounding a headland on the Konkan coast, that long, serrated edge of Western India, where the Western Ghats drop 1,000 feet into the Arabian Sea. The water is warm, jade green, deceptively shallow. Hidden reefs run parallel to the shore beneath the surface. Mangrove estuaries and narrow tidal creeks cut into the jungle like capillaries. It is a coast designed by nature for ambush. The ships are heavy, loaded with pepper, cotton, and indigo. Their gun ports are closed. Their captains are watching the shoreline with the casual wariness of men who think they own the ocean. They do not. From behind a forested cape, low, green, barely visible against the monsoon haze, a swarm of small boats appears. Dozens of them. Fast, shallow draft vessels with lateen sails and banks of oars, skimming the water like a school of barracuda. They are called galavats and grabs, war vessels of the Maratha Navy. Behind them, almost invisible in the shadow of the cliff, a sea fortress rises from the rock itself. Vijay 27 bastions, triple-layered walls, a 40-kilometre creek so shallow that no European deep-water ship can navigate it. The British call it the Eastern Gibraltar. And they cannot take it. The galavats close at terrifying speed. Before the British can run out their heavy guns, grappling hooks bite into the merchantman's rails. Maratha boarding parties pour over the sides. Kohli fishermen turned naval warriors, armed with tulwars and matchlocks. Men who know these waters the way a shepherd knows his hills. Within 90 minutes, all 3 ships are taken. Their crews are prisoners. Their cargo is prize. And the man who ordered this, the man the British East India Company officially declared a pirate, is watching from the walls of Vijay with his arms folded. His name is Kanhoji Angre. He is not a pirate. He is the Sarkar, the Grand Admiral of the Maratha Navy. He holds a formal commission from the Chhatrapati of the Maratha Empire. He commands a fleet of over 100 warships, a network of more than 20 coastal fortresses, and 300 miles of coastline from Bombay to Vengurla. He's been fighting the British, the Portuguese, and the Dutch simultaneously for 2 decades, and he has never lost, not once. If stories like this keep you coming back, hit subscribe and stay tuned, because next time we're sailing into the story of next episode Tease. To understand Kanhoji Angre, you have to understand the ocean he was born into. By the mid-17th century, the western coast of India, the Konkan, was one of the most contested stretches of water on Earth. The Portuguese had arrived in 1498 with Vasco da Gama and spent the next century and a half trying to turn the Arabian Sea into a Portuguese lake. They controlled Goa, Daman, Diu, and Bassein. They issued cartazes, compulsory sea passes, to every vessel sailing their waters, and any ship found without one was fair game. It was not trade, it was extortion, backed by cannon. Then came the Dutch. The Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the VOC, arrived in force in the early 1600s, carving out their own trading posts and challenging Portuguese monopoly with a larger fleet and deeper pockets. And then the English. The East India Company established its first factory at Surat in 1612 and took possession of Bombay in 1668, a wedding gift from the Portuguese crown to Charles II of England, who leased it to the company for £10 of gold a year. 3 European empires, all claiming sovereignty over waters that belonged to none of them. And each of them treated the Indian Ocean not as shared commons, but as private real estate. Something to be fenced off with cannon and customs houses. But there was a 4th force on this coast, and the Europeans, absorbed in their competition with each other, consistently underestimated it. The Maratha Empire. In 1654, a young Maratha warrior king named Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj did something no Indian ruler had done in centuries. He looked at the Portuguese caravels and the English merchantmen and the Dutch flight ships dominating his coastline, and he built a navy to fight them. The first Maratha warship was laid down in a creek near Kalyan. Within 20 years, Shivaji had a fleet of several hundred vessels, a chain of sea forts, Sindhudurg, Vijayadurg, Suvarnadurg, Kanderi, Underi, and 2 admirals, Mainak Pandari and Daulat Khan, commanding a force of 5,000 sailors. It was the first indigenous Indian naval power in the age of European expansion, and it was born from a single insight, that whoever controls the coast controls the nation. If the Portuguese could dictate terms at sea, they could strangle the Maratha economy from the waterline. The only answer was a navy of your own. But Shivaji also understood something subtler. He did not try to build European ships. He built Indian ships, shallow draft, oar-powered, designed for the Konkan coast's labyrinth of creeks, estuaries, and tidal shallows. Where a Portuguese carrack drew 16 feet of water, a Maratha galivat drew 4. Where a British frigate needed deep anchorage, a Maratha grab could be beached, careened, and refloated in a single tide. This was not imitation, it was adaptation, a naval philosophy tailored to its own geography. Remember that principle. It matters. Shivaji died in 1680. His son, Sambhaji, continued the naval mission until his capture and execution by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in 1689. In the chaos that followed, civil war among the Maratha successors, Mughal invasions, a tripartite alliance of the Siddhis of Janjira, the Mughals, and the Portuguese, all combining to crush Maratha sea power, the navy withered. The forts stood, but the fleet shrank. The admirals quarrelled. The Siddhis, operating from their island fortress of Janjira just off the Konkan coast, raided Maratha coastal villages with impunity. By the late 1690s, the Maratha navy existed in name only, 10 ships, a few scattered garrisons, and a legacy that seemed destined for the museum. And then came Kanhoji. Kanhoji Angre was born in August 1669, the same decade Shivaji was building his fleet. His father, Tukoji, served at the sea fort of Suvarnadurg. Little is recorded about Kanhoji's childhood, but we know he grew up on the Konkan coast, among the Koli and Pandari fishing communities who would later form the backbone of his navy. He knew the tides, he knew the monsoons, he knew the shoals and creeks and hidden passages that no European chart recorded. His career began early. Around 1685, when Kanhoji was roughly 16, the Kiladar, the fort commander of Suvarnadurg, attempted to defect to the Siddhis of Janjira, a rival maritime power allied with the Mughals. The young Kanhoji seized control of the fort and captured the defector. When word reached Chhatrapati Sambhaji, the Maratha king rewarded him with command of Suvarnadurg. After the death of the previous Sarkar, Admiral Sidhoji Gujar, around 1698, Kanhoji inherited a navy in ruins, roughly 10 vessels and a handful of crumbling forts. He was formally appointed Sarkar by the Maratha court at Satara and given charge of 150 miles of open coastline. What he did next is the most remarkable feat of naval reconstruction in the age of sail. He built dockyards. He recruited the fishing communities of the Konkan, Kolis, Bhandaris, Karvis, born sailors who knew every reef and current from Bombay to Goa. He constructed new vessels, not the heavy, deep-draft warships of European design, but something entirely different. The Maratha fleet was built for the Konkan coast, not the open Atlantic. The Galavat was the workhorse, a small, fast, oar and sail-powered warboat, displacing between 30 and 120 tons, armed with 4 to 10 light cannons and up to 50 oars. It could operate in water so shallow that a European frigate would run aground trying to follow. The Grab, the Gurab, was the heavy hitter, displacing up to 400 tons, 3-masted, carrying broadsides of 6 and 9-pounder guns, with 2 heavier 12-pounders mounted forward, firing through ports cut in the bow bulkhead. Unlike European warships, which delivered their firepower broadside on ice, the Grab was designed to chase our close arse and board. It was a pursuit weapon, and every Grab had an attendant galivat, both to tow it in dead calms when no wind filled the sails, and to carry extra boarding parties for the moment of attack. The tactical doctrine was devastating in its simplicity. A Maratha raiding squadron, typically 1 or 2 grabs with a dozen gallivats, would wait in a concealed creek or behind a fortified headland. When a European merchantman appeared, the gallivats swarmed out first, rowing at speed, too fast and too shallow for the merchantman's heavy guns to track. They closed from multiple angles, pouring in musket fire and light swivel gun shot. While the merchantman's crew was pinned down, the grab closed under oar power, brought its bow chasers to bear at point-blank range, and then the boarding party went over the rail. The entire engagement, from first sighting to surrender, rarely lasted more than an hour. It was, in essence, Ganami Kava, guerrilla warfare, taken to sea. Shivaji had invented it on land. Kanhoji perfected it on water. By the early 1700s, Kanhoji commanded 10 grabs and 50 gallivats, a force of more than 100 vessels when scouting boats and supply craft were included. His network of coastal forts stretched from Kandari Island, within sight of Bombay Harbour, to Vijaydurg, 200 miles south. Each fort was provisioned from the landward side, by road, not by sea, which meant that a European naval blockade was meaningless. You could bottle up his harbours from the water for months, and his garrisons would eat rice and fish brought overland from the Konkan villages, watching your sailors starve, and Kanhoji employed anyone who was good. Dutch navigators commanded some of his best vessels. A Jamaican pirate named James Plantain served as his chief gunner. Portuguese defectors from Goa manned his artillery. It was a multinational fleet in service of an Indian empire, and every European power on the coast was about to discover what that meant. The first real shock came on November 4th, 1712. Kanhoji's fleet intercepted the armed yacht Algerine, the personal vessel of William Aislabie, the governor of the Bombay Presidency, the governor of Bombay, the most senior representative of the British East India Company on the western coast of India. His yacht, captured, his officials, taken prisoner. Thomas Chown, the chief of the company's factory at Karwar, killed in the action. Chown's wife, a prisoner of the Maratha Navy. The yacht and Mrs. Chown were released on February 13th, 1713. The price, 30,000 rupees, a princely ransom that the East India Company paid through gritted teeth. Think about this for a moment. The governor of Bombay, the man who represented the commercial arm of the British Empire in Western India, had his personal ship seized by an Indian admiral. Imagine the humiliation in the company's boardrooms in London. Imagine the dispatches. Imagine the fury. And Kanhoji did not stop. In 1717, he seized the British merchant ship Success. In 1718, he captured 3 more company vessels in quick succession, then blockaded the port of Bombay itself and extracted a further ransom of £8,750. The company that would one day rule a subcontinent was paying protection money to a man they called a pirate. Charles Boone arrived as the new governor of Bombay in December 1715. Determined to crush Angre, he built 25 new warships within a year at a cost of over £51,000. He launched expedition after expedition against the Maratha forts. Every single one failed. In 1718, the company attacked Vijaydurg with floating batteries and a landing force. The shells burst against the rock without effect. The landing party was cut to pieces by cannon fire and the deadly accuracy of Maratha marksmen firing from the triple-walled bastions. The British squadron limped back to Bombay. In 1720, another expedition, this time with heavier ships. Same result. The fort's 40-kilometre creek was too shallow for the company's frigates to navigate, and the Maratha gallivats swarmed out from hidden inlets to harass their flanks. The attack was declared a failure. The British expedition's commander was accused of cowardice and dismissed from service. And then, in November 1721, came the most ambitious assault yet, a joint Anglo-Portuguese operation, the kind of combined force that should have been overwhelming. The Portuguese viceroy, Francisco José de Sampaio e Castro, committed 2,500 land troops, marching overland from their territory at Chol. The British brought a similar force, plus 5 company ships, plus, for the first time, Royal Navy warships under Commodore Thomas Matthews, over 6,000 soldiers, 4 men of war. The target, Colaba Fort, Kanhoji's advanced bastion near Bombay. The result was catastrophic for the Europeans. The Portuguese troops could not coordinate with the British amphibious force. The naval bombardment could not breach the fort's walls. The landing parties were repelled. The 558 Indian troops under British command refused to advance into the withering fire from Kanhoji's batteries. The entire force withdrew in disorder. Commodore Matthews, a professional Royal Navy officer who would later rise to the rank of Admiral of the Blue, could not take a single Maratha fort. He sailed home. The company wrote it off. Angre celebrated. What made Kanhoji so difficult to defeat was not just his tactics, it was his political intelligence. He never fought a two-front war if he could avoid it. When the British were his primary enemy, he kept the Portuguese placated with diplomatic courtesies. When the Portuguese grew aggressive, he signed treaties with the English. He played the Siddhis against the Mughals and the Mughals against the Europeans, always ensuring that he faced only one enemy at a time. When the Maratha Empire itself tore in two, a succession war between Chhatrapati Shahu and the regent Tarabai, Kanhoji backed Tarabai, was nearly punished for it, but negotiated his way out through the diplomacy of Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath. The result, he kept his fleet, kept his forts, and was formally reconfirmed as Sarkar with even greater authority than before. He was, in short, as dangerous at the negotiating table as he was at sea. And through it all, he continued collecting jakat, the tax, the toll, from every merchant ship sailing the Konkan coast. Those who paid sailed free. Those who refused lost their ships. It was not piracy, it was sovereignty. And here is where we have to stop and look at the sources, because the sources are the battlefield. Every European account of Kanhoji Angre, British, Portuguese, Dutch, calls him a pirate. The East India Company records are consistent. Angre is a pirate, his raids are piracy, and his tolls are extortion. This language was not accidental. It was strategic. Calling someone a pirate in the 18th century was not just an insult, it was a legal designation. A pirate had no rights under international law. A pirate's property could be seized. A pirate could be hanged without trial. But consider the facts. Kanhoji held a formal commission, a sanad, from the Chhatrapati of the Maratha Empire, the sovereign ruler of the most powerful Indian state of the 18th century. He was appointed Sarkar by the court at Satara. His fleet operated under the Maratha flag. His taxes, the jakat, were levied under Maratha authority, in Maratha territorial waters, on ships transiting Maratha coastline. When the Maratha Empire had an internal succession dispute between Chhatrapati Shahu and the regent Tarabai, Kanhoji negotiated between the factions and was formally reconfirmed as Admiral by Shahu's chief minister, Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath. This is not piracy. This is a state navy enforcing maritime sovereignty. The European powers called him a pirate, for the same reason they called Shivaji a rebel and Tipu Sultan a tyrant, because the alternative was to acknowledge that an Indian power had a legitimate right to control Indian waters. And that acknowledgement would have undermined the entire legal and moral framework of European colonial commerce. Here is the question the sources force us to ask. If the East India Company could levy customs duties at Bombay, and the Portuguese could charge for cartazes off Goa, and the Dutch could blockade the Spice Islands, why was it piracy when an Indian admiral collected tolls on the Indian coast? The answer, of course, is that it was not piracy at all. It was simply inconvenient for the Europeans. And because the Europeans wrote the histories, the word pirate stuck. Now, to be fair, some of Kanhoji's methods were rough by any standard. He took hostages. He held prisoners for ransom. He burned ships that refused to pay. Merchant captains of many nationalities suffered at his hands. These were not the actions of a gentle administrator, but they were the standard practices of every naval power of the era, including the British, whose East India Company had its own armed fleet and was not above seizing ships, bombarding ports, and holding Indian rulers, families hostage when negotiations stalled. The only difference was who was doing the seizing and who was writing the report. Consider the Jakat itself. Kanhoji did not invent the concept. The Maratha state collected chauth, a tax of 1/4 of revenue, from territories under its protection, and Sardeshmukhi, an additional 10%, from lands under its administrative umbrella. These were not extortions. They were the fiscal instruments of a functioning state, recognized by the Mughal emperor himself in the treaty negotiations of 1719. When Kanhoji collected jakat from ships transiting Maratha waters, he was extending this existing tax system to the sea. The European trading companies, accustomed to sailing Indian waters without paying anyone, simply refused to acknowledge any Indian sovereign's right to tax them. Their refusal was not based on law. It was based on power, the assumption that European canon trumped Indian sovereignty. Until Kanhoji proved otherwise. There is a striking irony in how Kanhoji Angre is remembered today. In European and American popular culture, the golden age of piracy is overwhelmingly Atlantic. Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, Henry Every, Anne Bonny. The Indian Ocean barely registers. When Hollywood imagines pirates in Indian waters, it gives us the fictional East India Company of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Lord Cutler Beckett, Davy Jones, the Flying Dutchman. The company is the villain, yes, but it is a European villain fought by European heroes. The Indian admiral who actually fought the real East India Company, who actually blockaded the real Bombay, captured the real governor's yacht, and humiliated the real company fleet, is absent from the screen. It is one of the great asymmetries of popular history. The Pirates of the Caribbean franchise made the East India Company the most recognizable naval villain in cinema. But the man who humiliated the real one, the man who did in life what Jack Sparrow did in fiction, remains virtually unknown to Western audiences. Even in gaming, where Assassin's Creed, Black Flag brought the golden age of piracy to millions of players, the Indian Ocean remains untouched. Kanhoji Angre, a real-life asymmetric warrior fighting a vastly more powerful corporate empire from fortified coastal strongholds, is precisely the kind of figure that franchise was built for. And yet he waits. But in India, the memory is vivid. The Indian Navy, the modern Indian Navy, the 5th largest in the world, named a shore establishment after him. INS Angre, the main base and depot of the Western Naval Command, sits in Mumbai. A statue of Kanhoji stands in the naval dockyard, in Colaba, the very place where his fort once dominated the harbour entrance. His samadhi, his memorial, sits in Alibag, near the Colaba fort, where he died on July 4, 1729, at the age of 59. The island of Kandari, where he completed the fortification that Shivaji had begun in 1679, is officially named Kanhoji Angre Island. He died in his bed, undefeated. For 30 years, the 3 greatest maritime empires on earth, Britain, Portugal, and Holland, tried everything in their considerable arsenal to destroy him and failed. Not one of their expeditions took a single major Maratha fort during his lifetime. Not one of their fleets broke his control over the Konkan coast. It was only after his death, 27 years after, that the forts finally fell. And even then, it took treachery. Kanhoji's sons divided his domain between them. Sambhaji and Sekhoji held different territories. Manaji and Tulaji governed others. Without their father's political skill, they quarrelled among themselves and with the Maratha Peshwa. Tulaji Angre, who eventually consolidated power, made the fatal mistake of alienating his own suzerain, by one account sending the Peshwa's envoys back with their noses sliced off. In February 1756, 27 years after Kanhoji's death, a combined force sailed for Vijayadurg. Rear Admiral Charles Watson of the Royal Navy brought 4 ships of the line, the Kent, the Cumberland, the Tiger, and the Salisbury, 60 to 70 guns each, a firepower that the previous expeditions had never possessed. Colonel Robert Clive, the same Clive who would later conquer Bengal, landed troops with the Maratha Peshwa's own soldiers. The Peshwa had authorized the attack. The man inside the fort, Tulaji Angre, had no allies left. He had alienated his brothers, insulted his suzerain, and burned his last diplomatic bridge. On February 12th, Watson opened fire. The bombardment was overwhelming, a 5-hour barrage that silenced the fort's guns, set Tulaji's entire fleet ablaze in the harbour, one 74-gun warship, 8 grabs, dozens of gallivets, all burning. The next morning, the British warships closed to pistol-shot range. The walls were breached. Tulaji surrendered. He spent the rest of his life in Maratha captivity at Solapur, where he died around 1786. But note the terms. It was not the British alone who took the Eastern Gibraltar. It was the British plus the Maratha government. The Marathas handed the key to the Europeans because the Angre sons had become a liability to their own empire. The fort was not conquered. It was betrayed. Kanhoji himself would never have allowed it. Stand on the walls of Vijaydurg today. The fort is quiet now. The bastions are still there, all 27 of them, rising from the laterite rock above a sea that has not changed in 3 centuries. The creek that swallowed European frigates still runs shallow and treacherous beneath the headland. The triple walls still stand, older than any British structure in India. Through the cannon embrasures, you can see the Arabian Sea stretching to the horizon, the same horizon that Kanhoji Angre watched every morning for 30 years. No ships come around the headland now. No gallivets swarm from the hidden inlets. The dockyards where Maratha carpenters built grabs from Konkan teak are silent. The sea is empty. But the sea remembers. It remembers a man born in a fort, raised among fishermen, who inherited a broken fleet and turned it into the most effective coastal navy of the 18th century. It remembers the gallivets skimming the shallows like herons, the grabs closing under oar in the dead calm of a monsoon morning, the boarding parties crashing over the rails of ships that flew the flags of London, Lisbon, and Amsterdam. It remembers 30,000 rupees in ransom for the governor of Bombay's yacht. It remembers the shells bursting harmlessly against the walls of the Eastern Gibraltar. The Europeans called him a pirate because they had no other word for an enemy they could not defeat. History has a better one, Admiral.